Hello and welcome. You're listening to Marketing Matters on the Wharton Podcast Network. This is our weekly podcast where we analyze the latest in marketing, advertising, customer behavior, branding, new product launches, retail specialties. I'm Barbara Kahn, the Patty and J.H. Baker Professor of Marketing, and my co-host, Professor Americus Reed, is out of town today, so I'm doing it by myself, which is sad. However, I am welcoming a terrific guest, a person we've had before and who knows quite a lot about everything that's happening in marketing. So it's very exciting to have him here. So I'd like to say hello to Peter Adams, who's the Dive. Hello, Peter.
Hi, Barbara. Thanks so much for having me on, and I'm happy to be on the show now that it's in podcast format.
Yeah, it should be fun. We put it out to our huge Wharton network and all Wharton network friends. So we have a very intelligent, interested audience who are very concerned about the latest things in marketing. And that's what's great to talk to you about, because you often talk about marketing trends and you talk about how marketers are adapting to economic shifts, to AI, to changing consumer behavior and all those kind of topics. And of course, you also talk about state of the art new marketing campaigns, the holiday campaigns that every marketing reporter seems to have to do at this time of year. What's happening in holiday marketing? But before we get to that, I know that you recently went to a conference sponsored, I think, or it was called Advertising Week Conference or something like that. I forget exactly what it's called. WARC, something like that.
Advertising Week in New York, yes.
Oh, okay. That's a pretty descriptive name. So Advertising Week in New York. And you get like some pretty high up marketers discussing some of the latest trends. And so I thought maybe we'd start there. And you can maybe tell us some of the things that you've talked about in thinking about what's going on in marketing.
Yeah, so for Advertising Week, it was an interesting time for the conference to happen. Obviously, there's quite a bit of uncertainty affecting multiple aspects of the industry right now with tariffs, with the conference landing right as holidays are ramping up. And then, on an individual company basis, there's quite a bit of consolidation. Advertising Week draws a lot of folks from the ad agency world and is actually in the same office space as some of the IPG agencies, which are getting acquired by Omnicom. So a little bit of a harried conference this year. I think people are a little jumpy, but also very well attended, which I think speaks to the fact that people are looking for kind of guidance and how
And
to navigate
networking
this
for the
stuff.
next job.
Sure, definitely. I mean, you've seen um, just in the past few months the number of layoffs, some of them affecting marketing pretty intensely. So yeah, definitely a lot of interesting offsite happening to complement the main sort of agenda that's put on by Advertising Week itself. And yeah, many of the typical topics you would expect as well. AI, creator and influencer marketing. I moderated a panel that was about local marketing strategies, but ended up actually intersecting with a couple of those topics as well, because that is another area that is being disrupted and evolving very quickly right now.
So there's a couple big themes that maybe we can dig into a little bit that I saw in some of your writing. One of them was this interesting idea, on the vanishing middle class. So, and I've seen a little some changes on that too. It seems like the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and there's nothing in the middle. And obviously, a lot of marketing is being generated to those, 1% rich people. So you're seeing a lot of emphasis on new luxury and things like that. But how does that affect in general? Not everybody's going to be able to focus on the 1%. So what's the big effect of this vanishing middle class?
Yeah, I mean it's for years or for decades, marketing, broad-based marketing has focused on, the middle class folks, people who can be regular repeat purchasers. You think of categories like packaged goods, stuff like that, even stuff like more premium food and beverage brands. This has always been a big opportunity, but as you pointed out, there's been some research that was put together by WARC. Also, other companies like McKinsey have sort of identified some of these patterns where It's just an increasingly bifurcated market. That's a fun thing to say out loud. But yeah, there's incredibly well-off people who have, continued to prop up the economy. If you look at the share of how consumer spending hasn't maybe tapered off as much as some people expected it to, given tariffs and things like that, a decent amount of it is propelled by, very well-off upper middle class and higher consumers. But yeah, then there's the other end of the spectrum, and it affects marketing strategies because marketers now need to factor value and affordability into their messaging more, even if they aren't necessarily budget brands. They have to acknowledge that things that used to be maybe regular or repeat purchases are maybe a little bit of an extra ask. I mean, you think about categories like groceries, that's where a lot of people express the most frustration with prices rising. But it also changes what these researchers call kind of consumer milestones. I mean, fewer people are buying a house or having kids. Conventionally, those events happening is a big spending trigger for brands. They
Yeah.
go, this is now an opportunity for us. But if those people are no longer doing that, and they're no
Oh,
longer
that's
doing that in
interesting.
greater numbers with young consumers, that poses a real problem.
Yeah, the housing market is particularly interesting. People have a little bit of golden handcuffs because a lot of them bought property or starter houses when the loans were really cheap, and they are locked in. They can't get that loan again. And so they're kind of locked in. And I think that's stagnating the housing market a little too. Then, of course, on the other end, there's these people who have just way too much money. And so some of the industry that's developing around that ultra luxury is an interesting kind of marketing situation. I'm looking a little bit about that in like branded residences and use of luxury brand names on condominiums like Mercedes Benz or Aston Martin condos, and this idea that's really catering to the wealthy. But that's a very, very small percentage of the overall population. So not clearly not what's driving most marketing. And so I guess, along the lines of what you're saying is if the marketers are going after not the ultra wealthy, but the other part, and they're focusing on value, what's your take on what that does to loyalty? I mean, a lot of what we're talking about when we talk about marketing in our marketing classes now is the importance of customer lifetime value and picking the right customers, and then, like subscription models and retaining customers and things like that. But if you're really focusing on price and value, that's almost the antithesis of loyalty in some sense, unless they're making some of this value contingent on relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think the loyalty question as it gets challenged a lot. I think depending on the category, marketers now have the benefit of having a lot more granular data. You think about places like retail and even restaurant QSR brands. They've had loyalty as part of a playbook for a while, but especially now with some of these factors we're talking about, knowing when people are buying them, what's pushing them to buy, and being able to leverage that to not only inform their own marketing strategies, but in the case of retail, now monetizing those capabilities to sell to other brands that are also struggling with the same
Right.
problems.
Retail
Um,
media networks.
yeah, exactly. But the loyalty thing, I read an interesting report from this agency called Razorfish the other day, and it goes back to that sort of milestone question we were talking about just now. There's a really interesting insight there in there. I forget the specific share of consumers, but the consumers were basically saying, I would rather receive these sort of bespoke promotions that recognize frustrating points in life. Like if I take a red eye flight, I want early check-in at a hotel. And I would prefer that over getting an upgrade to the suite on my honeymoon. So again, you think a honeymoon, that is a traditional consumer milestone, things that marketers maybe try to usually add a little more white glove service around. But more people are kind of saying, there's so many aspects of day-to-day life that are frustrating. If you can alleviate that in any way, that fosters loyalty. Um, and yeah, I know, pricing and value and promotions are seen as sort of low-hanging fruit in the loyalty space right now. But I do think there are a lot of loyalty strategies kind of being driven on deal right now. Yeah.
Yeah, my problem is whenever you do it on deal, that just I don't know, but I don't think of it. I think of that as a fight to the bottom, and typically you want to build it more on what you were saying earlier, understanding what the customer's buying, looking at data, and then maybe alleviating pain points as you suggested, or maybe finding new opportunities to delight, whichever way. But still, it is contingent on understanding the data. And that brings us to another big issue that you wrote about, and I'm sure was discussed a lot, is how AI is changing both customer behavior and marketing response, and to your initial point, like jobs and things like that. So, I mean, maybe you can speak to each one of those buckets. The first one that I'm interested in is, I don't know how much they talked about from the customer point of view, but not only are marketers using AI to look at the data to build the models that you're talking about and to identify some of those opportunities, to customize to a customer. But a customer is now looking to AI to tell them what to buy. And was there any conversation on how that's changing customer decision making, this focus on, ChatGPT to help you make a decision on what to buy?
To the extent that everyone is obsessed with the sort of the agentic question right now, definitely is a word that was top of mind during a lot of the AI talks at Advertising Week and continues to be as people start to think ahead to the holidays in 2026. I mean, Amazon and their earnings boasting about how much their assistant is being used. It only went national, I think, within the past, year or so. But they've got the muscle to kind of push people towards features like that. And Walmart, the biggest retailer in the traditional sense, also working with, the chat GPTs of the world to develop similar capabilities. And yeah, I mean, I think for marketers thinking in the long term, it's a potentially exciting channel. Um, but for right now, it's sort of the large companies with the capabilities to invest in this stuff will probably have the first mover advantage. And for others who don't have the sophistication, it'll potentially sort of be a disadvantage in some ways. Amazon has already eaten up so much share of e-commerce and things like that by just being the most technologically sophisticated and convenient. Do they further grab more share if they've got the best shopping assistant or what have you?
Yeah, I mean, your answer to the question, you flipped the question to what I asked, but in answering your question, you probably answered it also. I was thinking about how it changed actually the mindset of the consumer. But
Hmm.
what you're suggesting is these agents really exist for some of the big players. And so clearly they're going to be programmed to give the big players more advantage. So perhaps what's happening is the more you depend on these agents, the more you kind of narrow the playing field because only the big guys are having them. I guess that's what you were saying. I was just wondering, like, if it changes how I make decisions. Do people just listen to what the agents say and do that, and then so that who has the agents really is going to frame where purchases are being made? I guess that's what your answer was. And do you believe that?
I think consumers, I mean, there's still areas where AI falls short, but purely anecdotally know that, yeah, people, when they're struggling to think of something like a holiday gift idea, will prompt ChatGPT, like, this person likes X and Y. What's a sort of a potentially surprising or thoughtful gift I could get them. That's how people plan, everything from vacations now and yeah, holidays for sure. I'm not sure, like the adoption of these individual chatbots kind of at the consumer level is quite high and continues to be very engaged. And just speaking from personal experience right now, every year my family does a Secret Santa drawing through a platform that also doubles as serving gift recommendations. And I noticed for the first time this year, it has an AI thing. So if you're drawing up a wish list for your Secret Santa, you can plug some prompts in and it'll recommend them to you. So it's definitely informing, yeah, consumer shopping behavior.
Yeah, yeah. And so therefore the people who control those agents and control those platforms are obviously doing it in their own best interest. And so you're going to see the big get bigger in that kind of thing because the smaller ones can't afford it. Um, so the other thing that people are talking about with AI, and it sounds like, was a topic there, was how much it's replacing jobs or how much at these advertising agencies or whatever, these marketing situations, a lot of the work that used to be done by people is now being done by AI. Was that a concern or?
I mean, I think the idea that AI is wholesale replacing roles at agencies is, um, maybe a little overstated sometimes. There's no doubt that, agencies are investing very heavily in this, but I read an interesting article the other day that was talking about this AI washing. Obviously, the economy is not in a very good spot right now. Ad agencies in particular, the publicly traded holding companies, have not been in a good spot for a long time. I mean, they're mostly financially pretty distressed companies that are now looking to break apart and sell stuff off. I think if they can sell their layoff story as, AI is replacing jobs, it looks better for them in public. But the thing that's more interesting for me with the agencies is how it's starting to switch up how they approach their services models. So WPP, the largest ad agency, last month introduced this new offering where basically their clients don't need to hire an agency anymore. They can basically just make use of WPP's AI technology for their campaigns. So they've gotten a lot of questions. Does this cannibalize agency work? You're basically saying you don't need to hire people anymore. You can just borrow our tech. And it'll be interesting to see if sort of their competitors also adopt this. Because it's the type of thing that, yeah, definitely disrupts sort of the traditional agency model, but might also be kind of necessary as this is what clients are sort of demanding. And they value the ability to have technology partners who can help them execute their marketing.
Yeah. Well, that'll be interesting. Well, given that we have you now and it is Christmas, I see that you have written on a number of these new holiday stories and what's happening. So we might as well dig in and see if there's anything interesting. This one isn't a holiday story, but since you wrote about it, let me just ask. Pepsi has been changing all their logos. I mean, every year there's a new logo change for them. Last year was Mountain Dew. This year they overdid their corporate branding. Did you have a takeaway on, like, how important that is? Or, like, you know, I know they think it's important, they spend a lot of time on it, but did what was your reaction to the importance of overhauling this and I don't know, what did you take of that when you wrote that article?
Yeah, I mean, they're a business that's under quite a lot of pressure right now. They have an activist investor campaign that they're sort of contending with that's pushing them to shed some lower performing aspects of the business. And, it's right there in the name, PepsiCo. Pepsi for a long time was, kind of the big focus. They're a food and beverage company, but Pepsi is the flagship. And at least when it comes to traditional full sugar, Pepsi is a brand that has been in pretty serious decline in recent years, has dropped in just a few years from being the number two soda in the US to number four. And the PepsiCo corporate branding for a long time sort of mirrored the Pepsi branding. It was similar color schemes and sort of visual motifs, but this new overhaul moves as dramatic. It is the most dramatic change away from that yet. So, what they're trying to do is highlight we're not just Pepsi. We own 500 brands and we own cool new growing brands. I mean, they recently acquired Siete, the Mexican food company. They bought Poppy, which is obviously their big response to this prebiotic cola disruption. So this overhaul is sort of, yeah, positioning them as more than just Pepsi and being a kind of well-rounded food and beverage business. And yeah, the visual identity looks nothing like what they've done before.
Nothing, yeah, I'm just looking at it now. I mean, I know we're not showing it, but it is radically different from the past where it really did focus on Pepsi and what that meant, and now it's, the red and blue is gone. It's more like, natural colors, organic kind of feel, definitely to food, and, well, we'll see how that happens. And now Todd Kaplan used to be at Pepsi, but then he moved to Kraft, I think. And I think you wrote an article about that too. Did you write something about Kraft? I thought I saw something on that. Did
Sure. Yeah,
you?
he had a big presence at Advertising Week, and was
He's a
talk.
cool guy. We had him on the podcast, and like I don't know why he left Pepsi. I don't know what, but he had been at Pepsi for a really long time, and I guess he left a few years ago for the opportunity at Kraft. So yeah, what was your take from what he's been doing?
Well, so his talk at Advertising Week touched on a thing that I think is affecting a lot of legacy marketers right now is he has always been a big champion, or I shouldn't say always, but in recent years has been a very big champion of this idea of um, thinking past traditional media strategies toward earned media.
Oh,
How do you
yeah.
get your brands being talked about in culture in ways that extend beyond paid advertising? And so basically in his first, year plus at Kraft, he has been just sort of peppering the industry with like these little and large activations that are very kind of culturally oriented. Heinz Mustard did a collaboration with Mustard, the DJ behind the Kendrick Lamar songs. And so he spoke at Advertising Week just sort of about how to identify those moments and kind of keep pace with the sort of churn of mostly social media driven content. These memes emerge overnight and it presents brands a small window of opportunity to kind of go viral and attach themselves to those. But how do you identify them? How do you make the most of them and make sure they're the right fit for your brand was a lot of what he was talking about. And this is a change we see taking hold all across the board of this kind of pivot away from traditional kind of paid national advertising to this very socially organic content oriented approach. And it's led to some interesting results for sure. I mean, Kraft Heinz has, managed to keep its brands a little more on the pulse of culture. But the larger business obviously, is struggling with what a lot of other kind of large packaged foods companies are right now.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because it's a different tool set than people have, and it sounds like he's somebody who has the traditional one and is in the new world, because now you're looking for these cultural moments. You gotta do them fast because they change. So you don't have a lot of time to test everything,
Yeah.
and if you don't do it through the lens of your brand, you can get into trouble. I mean, the famous one a couple years ago was Bud Light and Target and all of them. They responded to something that would seem perhaps on the drawing board to be a no-brainer, and then they release it and they get this really negative response and see a huge effect on sales. Like, it's not small effects on this. And yet if you're doing that kind of marketing where you're looking for the cultural moment or the opportunity, I could imagine it's tough to know at really quickly whether or not it's the right move for your brand to discuss it. I guess you have to have some kind of blueprint as to what is in the brand's DNA and what isn't, and things like that. Did he talk about something along those lines? Like how to know it and how to know it fast?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've kind of, I don't know how much, a specific criteria is employed, but I think, yeah, very much understanding the sort of brand values and where they come from. Does this make sense with our narrative? And this is a case where, we just talked a little bit about how agencies are being disrupted, but this is a case where kind of like partners can help. There was a separate talk I went to that was with PepsiCo, and their CMO was saying, or their beverages CMO was saying, we've got some of the most experienced marketers, the most talented marketers, but we don't get the algorithms like our agency does. So they've developed this new partnership model where they've put their social agency much closer to their internal teams to kind of keep a pulse on these things that we're talking about, making sure they're aligned with the brand values and things like that, but also that they can be reactive in the way that we're talking about. So it's definitely causing a lot of these traditional large marketing organizations to kind of switch up how they think about everything from agencies to CMO roles and things like that as well.
You think about like these companies that are great, and then all of a sudden they make a misstep, like a Duolingo or something like that was like the everybody thought they were terrific, and then I forgot what it was, but they made some misstep, and
Hmm.
so I would imagine part of what you're doing with this is not only learning to figure out which ones you respond to and which ones you don't, and then when you do, how you make sure it's through the brand lens, but you gotta also figure, what do you do when you made a mistake? How fast do you get out of it? Because it is a very fast window, so if you make the mistake quickly and maybe own it quickly, it might go you might not have to deal with it for too long.
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything else. I think the decision making needs to be fast, but unfortunately, we were just talking about the cultural relevance brands can find in responding quickly to social stuff. I mean, social stuff can also quickly bury brands. I mean, a good example of this recently was Cracker Barrel
Yeah, right.
made a fairly innocuous update to their logo. There's been a good deal of reporting, including in the Wall Street Journal, about how basically, even bots sort of seized on this as a contentious topic, and they're still trying to kind of claw their way out of something that I've never really understood why that was such a flashpoint. I mean, you can say what you want about the logo, but I didn't think it should be as controversial as it ended up being. So, yeah, I think staying really reactive and being able to pivot quickly is super important. Not waiting weeks on it, not going through, multiple different agencies and crisis PR firms. You got to kind of maybe go with your gut a little bit more on some of this stuff. The Duolingo case is one of these things where I think the leaderships at the company just sort of misread the room on AI. They started talking so much about AI and how great AI is. And the thing people loved about their marketing was it was very focused on their mascot, but it was very human in a way. It was very humorous. It was their mascot reacting to things in culture. And then for the company leadership to say AI is all that matters and things like that, I think, it's a really testy subject still.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was obviously very alienating to some of their user base.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how this. But anyway, let's end. I know we don't have that much time left, but it is Christmas. So let's go to the biggest retailer and the story you wrote on Walmart and the Grinch. What was your take on all of that?
Yeah, so Walmart for the past couple of years has really embraced this very pop culture forward messaging strategy. I mean, last year for the holidays, they ran an ad that featured, Gilmore Girls and all these kind of famous sort of seasonal touchstones. And this year they're kind of returning to a similar playbook, but focusing on one kind of cultural property, which is the Grinch. And they've basically built this whole kind of world where they're tying kind of their product assortment and services into the world of the Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss is How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and they've recently updated it. Walton Goggins, who previously appeared in their ads that they started running this summer, is now playing the Grinch. So, I think in times like this, we were having the conversation earlier about like kind of value and promotions, what a weird holiday period it is, and why that could potentially lead more people to kind of focus on messages of value. But Walmart is historically known for value, but they're leaning into a very kind of storytelling first approach, which I think might actually end up working pretty well for them. I think people are looking for a sense of escapism and nostalgia, and it gives them a chance to also they are highlighting their product assortment as well. But I think it's a pretty savvy campaign.
It's so funny because it's like that sounds so much like traditional marketing, going to Dr. Seuss and the Grinch and Christmas and nostalgia. I mean, those are things we were teaching 25 years ago. So you start from culturally forward and AI and social media, and you end up with Walmart and the Grinch. Kind of interesting what happens in marketing. Anyway, we are out of time. So, Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. And where can listeners go to read up with your stories and keeping up with the times?
Sure. You can always check out marketingdive.com. We also have a daily newsletter and 2 weekly newsletters focused on agencies and mobile marketing. And I post about my stuff on LinkedIn as well. So give me a look there.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. That's all we have time for today. I'd like to thank our producers, Dion Simpkins and Marissa Rema. And thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week. Till then, this has been Marketing Matters on the Wharton Podcast Network. I'm Barbara Kahn, here without Americus Reed.